It's the train Vicar again. Today I'm not near a railway line or in my office. I'm on this ancient hill in Israel. That's because I'm also involved in archaeology, but that's a whole different matter. Now, on this hill, cities stood through the centuries. The biggest city here was in biblical times, about 2,700 years ago or so. Since then, this place is now pretty much barren. Not many people live on this hill, but there are settlements all around me, and over there's still a nature reserve. So let me show you some of the exciting landscape of Israel. From that hill of the ancient city, we see other hills that are today in forest. Out in the west, where the sun is setting, that is the coastal plain. And through this coastal plain, that is where the railway lines run these days. Nearby, as you can see, there are forested hills and also hills that are fairly bare. They are all nature reserves. There's also agriculture in this area and some industrial facilities. Overall, it's not that built up, certainly in comparison to other places in Israel. Israel is actually quite an industrial country. It's often quite hard to imagine what it would have been like in times gone by when a lot of the countryside was not that inhabited, when there were no high rises around every corner. And so today it's different. Maybe you know the passage from the prophet Isaiah where it says in chapter 40, make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain. And somehow, it seems, in recent years, the engineers here have taken it quite literally. They have carved highways through hills. They have made, so to say, a plain for the transport corridors. And it is mainly roads that cut through the hills of Israel. But at the same time, Israel has now remembered its railways. After the British left in 1948 and the Second World War, the railways actually were a bit of an orphan and were generally run, but more or less run into the ground. That has changed since the beginning of this century, really. And Israel has also invested a lot of money into railways. Now, the change as far as rolling stock is concerned happened when these Danish intercity 4 were first imported into the country. Then other rolling stock from Germany and Switzerland and Spain and, well, from lots of other European countries uh, became common in Israel, and now they've even got sections of their lines that are electrified. So a lot of change has happened with railways in Israel in recent years. The powers that be in Israel have realized that for a modern country, railways are essential, and so they have reactivated them, increased their coverage, and the services are really good now. So, in a sense, Israel is a country that shows how neglected railway lines can be reactivated, how good railway services can work again. Of course, there are problems with Israeli railways. In particular, the stations are not well integrated with land use around them. And in a sense, the builders of railway lines and planners have not taken the opportunity to use railway lines and services to build good communities. Nevertheless, I think that the railways in Israel teach us that renewal is possible, and maybe that's not just so in the case of railways and societies and things like that. It can also be in our own personal lives, in the communities and families that we live in. That's a positive that we can take from the recent history in Israel, and particularly the renewal of the railways here. The other lesson, which is probably not as positive, is the abuse of some of the biblical terminology. So, because sometimes people say make straight the way when they refer to Israel's highway program and the very wasteful development that is happening here. And of course, people know that, that's not what the verse refers to, but they make their program sound nice by quoting biblical phrases. I hope that before we do something like that, we reflect on whether it's truthful to what the Bible meant. And of course, the words in Isaiah really referred to God's coming, because it said, "In the desert, prepare the way for the Lord." It's God's comfort and God's grace that is coming here. And in the New Testament, we read that John was the one preparing the way for the Lord, for Jesus. So that's what it's referring to, not to building plans, but to a change in our hearts, to a change among humans.